Hi, everyone. Dom Famularo here. I hope you all have enjoyed your time during this summer as the summer begins to wind down. And this is the Sabian Education Network spot that I get to have. And I love these spots because I get a chance to step into the minds of so many interesting people and so many people that have so much to offer that it really is imperative that you become aware of who these people are, and especially my guest today, because Bob has been around for a long time leading the path of drumming education in all different areas. And he's someone that has always inspired me. And every time I talk to him, I learn something more about Bob. I learn something more about the industry. And that allows me to even grow as a person myself. So if you would please welcome, and I'm going to bring in Bob Breithaupt.
Hi, Dom. How are you?
Fantastic, Bob. Thank you so much for joining me, Bob. You're the Sabian Education Network. This spot kind of allows us to take, artists like yourself and educators like yourself and people that have been in the industry, and you have been involved in so many aspects of the industry that I want people to really kind of understand who you are and get to know the magic that you always share with all of your students.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here. It's as I tell my students always, it's the music business. It's the business of music. It's important for us to be able to do lots of different things, have a plan A and a plan B, and hopefully that one of those will work. It's a very long life that we have to lead and live, and it's important to be able to do a lot of different things and try to do them well.
Well, you sure do. And I want to kind of go back in the beginning stages, Bob. I mean, what got you involved in music and percussion, and where was your early education? Where did that all start for you?
Well, I grew up in a household that enjoyed music. My mom was a very avocational musician. She played some piano and some violin, and I was interested in the trombone of all things when I was a little tiny kid. I think because of watching shows like the Lawrence Welk Show. We laugh about that stuff, but in those days, those were family major kinds of things. Whether it was the Ink Spots or Lawrence Welk. I mean, that's what you watch. We had 4 or 3 stations to watch, and
Right.
that was it. So like it or not, you were watching those kinds of things. But I just evolved into the music as a part of the band program. I sort of landed on playing drums. I had a violin teacher that told my 4th grade teacher that he didn't feel I had any kind of musical talent, so I turned into a drummer. Bada bing. So anyway, but there's a whole story behind that. I may tell if we have a minute, but
Yes.
But nonetheless, I went through. I will have to say that, and I'm sure that you feel the same way, and many of the people do. Drumming it was hard work, but it was easy. It was easy for me. It came quickly. I found out that unlike my work as an athlete or as a student, I was really good at it, and so you just follow through. And you proceed. And as I graduated from high school, I was thinking about. There was a great educator by the name of Rich Madison, euphonium player, jazz guy, who had kind of recruited me to go to North Texas. But I'm from Marion, Ohio, man. I mean, it was scary to get on a plane. I didn't get on a plane until I was 17 years old. Yeah. So the thought about moving to Texas, I chose instead to go to a place called Bowling Green State University in Ohio. There were a lot of other great musicians around that, including Lou Marini Jr.'s father, Lou.
Yeah.
And anyway, went through that. Graduated, was as a performance major. Played a lot in Toledo, a lot in Detroit. Was able to really get that going, and started studying a little bit. I went to some of the Ludwig symposiums, a couple of them. Got a chance to study a little bit with Joe Morello. Studied with a great regional teacher in Cleveland by the name of Bob McKee. In those days, as you remember, if you wanted to study drum set, you had to go somewhere to do that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you go to Chicago, in this case to Cleveland, maybe you go, you know, you go to New York and get a lesson with Sonny Igo, or, you know, it wasn't like guys were all over the place. So there was that. And anyway, one thing led to another. Had the opportunity to go out on the road after I graduated from college, but was also recruited to come to Columbus not to teach, but to play some musicals, because some summer musicals, stock musicals, because I could do all the percussion stuff. And you know, there was so much work here. I was thinking about moving to New York, but over time, I started teaching at Catholic University part-time for a couple years, playing some with the orchestra, playing lots of jazz gigs, shows, etc. My family's from this area. Nice. It was just like, well, okay, this is, you know, this is it. And yeah. So and along the way during this time, so I know you mentioned this also. There was a fellow that I had met, a great young drummer by the name of Jim Rupp, and he and I decided that Columbus needed a drum shop. You know, when you're young, you don't think about whether you're supposed to have a business degree. You know, it's like, yeah, let's open a drum shop. Anyway, so we opened Columbus Percussion in 1981, but I'll leave it at that for right now. You may have some other questions about it.
Yeah, well, I want to go back. What's interesting about it is the fact that, let's go back to your formative years. Were you taking lessons when you were in school? You were in the public school program.
Yeah. Yes. Interestingly, I was in the public school music program, but I took private lessons. We lived north of Columbus, about 40 miles north. My mom, we didn't really have a lot of money when I was a kid, but somehow, some way, my folks got me to Columbus and I started studying with a guy by the name of Charlie Brown. That was his stage name. Charlie Clutterbuck, who was a Wilcoxon student. You know, we've talked about second generation players, right? He was a Wilcoxon student. So I studied with him. I studied with a drummer and arranger by the name of John Tagenhorst. Tagenhorst did the arrangement for the OSU band's "Hang On Sloopy," which is their you know, theme song. The theme song, and then I also studied timpani with a guy by the name of Daryl Wood from a university close by. And my first lesson, I went in and he said, "Well, can you just play for me? I'll see if I can help you." And I played this Wilcox. He said, "You know, you played snare drum a lot better than I could ever play it." He was a French horn player who also played timpani, and which was a very important lesson for me at the time. It was just like, okay, because I knew this guy was a good musician.
Yeah.
But it was just like, okay, I'm going to have to learn to get something out of this gentleman that has nothing to do with how fast I can move my hands.
Right. Interesting.
You know, so he was vital in helping me develop my ear on timpani, and especially to think about touch and tone. Yeah. Because that's all he could talk about.
But those are extremely valuable points of understanding the craft, which is great that you were able to pull that out of him. So were you working on, I mean, you mentioned the Wilcoxon book. Were there other books that you were working on? Were you working on rudimental stuff? Were you working on drum set books? What was happening at that time?
Well, you know, I would say two books in particular that I remember working on was a rhythmic book called Variations of Drumming by Ralph C. Pace. Okay, which is a kind of a bit obscure book now. But what it did, Dom, was to get my teacher to have me sing rhythms and be able to identify what those were, in terms of what they looked like on the page. Yeah. And so, without realizing it, I was learning this internalizing of subdivision and put it on the page, which caused me to, which helped me develop into being a really good reader. And then, of course, the Chapin book, that was the Bible. So it was fun later in life to be able to talk so much to Jim about, first of all, the book, the original Chapin book, which is really a historical document.
Yeah, it really
as much
is.
as anything else.
Yeah.
It may have, it may have as much value as a historical document. But anyway, so those were two other books that I studied out of a lot.
Boy, that's so great. We have several people that are joining in on us from literally around the world. One of them is a phenomenal player and educator himself. Ed Sof has joined us as listening. So Ed, thank you so much for
Ed. Thank you.
And checking us out on what we're doing here. Ed is a phenomenal.
Well,
player.
We talk about people who change individuals' perspectives and lives, and Ed and I became colleagues in our drum set workshops, but that began first in my relationship with him as a teacher and a mentor in the mid-'70s. So I owe so much to Ed, as do many people.
Oh, there are so many drummers that I meet in the course of my teaching that just are so influenced by what Ed has done and continues to do.
Yes.
And his legacy of what he has left at North Texas, which is incredible. The players he's reached and what he's done. But that's what amazes me about players like Ed and like yourself. You're involved in the university. You're meeting all these young students, and you're hitting it hard. And the experience that you have as a student, you're now designing your own curriculum of how you're going to take them through and design their life is really what it comes down to.
Well, it's I can say that I probably get. I've had the opportunity to play all over the world, as all of us have, but the success of my students it's more meaningful to me that I find out that somebody got a really good gig or a really good teaching position than going and playing a really, I still love going and playing a great concert, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
it's just like, wow, I'm so happy that so-and-so is working with so-and-so or got this position or whatever. That's really, if we invest this kind of time into our craft, that's really what it's all about.
Well, that reward, as you said, that reward is pretty powerful, and you have had many students that have gone on and continue to go on. So you're learning out of these books. You get to college. So in college now, you're starting to step into other areas of percussion. Now you're stepping into timpani and mallets, and you're getting you're widening out your knowledge.
Yes, and I had done that beforehand, but I think that and it doesn't always work the same way for everybody. But I found that personally, both as a player and as a teacher, that that one instrument sort of led to the other. So the touch that we try to develop on timpani relates right over to a ride cymbal. Okay, I do a little exercise with my first year students where I take a triangle and I strike it and try to keep it from wobbling, obviously, and then talk to them about how does the triangle relate to timpani, or how does the triangle relate to a ride cymbal, or how does the triangle relate to everything else. So we begin there. That is really what probably was drilled home for me as a college student. I had a wonderful teacher by the name of Wendell Jones, who is not well known, but was a really, really fine vibist and a good percussionist. And he was a mentor to me in terms of not only playing, but also lots of things about business. And he used to have a joke in this way. He used to have a joke. So, Bob, what's the most important thing that a professional musician has to have? And I would say, oh, I don't want to. And I go, what is it? And he said, dark suit and black shoes. And so, I mean, I understood, we understand that we have to have the skills. But really what he was saying was that there's a lot more to this business than just the act of performing, which was something that has stuck with me, and I try to talk to my own students about all the time.
Well, it's kind of interesting when you think about just, we're learning an instrument, we're taking all this knowledge in, and then you started teaching at Capital about when?
Well, I started, like I say, I was kind of drafted to come down here in 1977. I had things are a lot different now. So, summer 1977, there was a gentleman who was the head of the conservatory at Capital University, and he said, yeah, we're thinking about making some changes. So you need to get back and get your master's degree done in a year. So no guarantees, but you need to get it done in a year. So I took that as a real hint, and which was really hard, by the way, because that's a 2-year program. Yeah. And I got it done, came back, and started in '78 as a part-time faculty member. Taught a little bit at Central State University in Ohio, and this happened for a couple of years. And as I say, that was the early '80s, and that's when, because of the need, that I was recognizing, or we were recognizing, that's about the same time we started Columbus Percussion. And so, so all this stuff was going on. We talk about the capacity to do lots of different things, Dom. And everybody's the same, but in my case, I was teaching at 2 universities. At that time, I was buying a house, starting as the president of Ohio PAS, starting a business. We didn't have any kids yet, but all, it was whatever, 18, 20 hours a day, every day. I think what happens is, if you work early in life as a player, and that's one of the great things about majoring in music, because you have to go at this pace. And so you develop the capacity for work, and by practicing and everything like that. And so that was a very, very fruitful period there during that time in the early '80s.
But I think what amazes me is that you had the passion and the desire to take risk and get involved with all this here. And even, like you said, meeting up with Jim Rupp. Jim Rupp is a phenomenal musician. He's a great, great drummer. He swings his tail off when he's playing all the time, and has had and continues to have an incredible career on his own. And you kind of team up. And now, next thing you know, you're stepping into having to rent a place and having to order product, and that's a whole nother full-time job.
Yeah, it was, because we were both really busy as players, and as everything else that was going on, but we were fulfilling a need. In those days, in the retail business, there were a lot, as you know. There were a lot of professional drum shops that were opening up right around that time. And ours, I'm not ours, because I haven't been with the company now for 15 years. But anyway, that we just decided to give it a whirl. We had some help from a gentleman by the name of Phil Zampino in Canton, with whom you remember. But he helped us with some things to get going. But nonetheless, the business just really took off, and it's still going. I was vice president of the business until 2006, and other things, things just change in life. It was just time for me to move on, and as I said at the time, 3 full-time jobs was enough. I didn't need to have a 4th. But anyway, that was being in the retail business a real eye opener for me, and it sort of provided a whole new and valuable perspective. Early on, you meet people. I mean, our first connection was in 1984
Yeah.
when you and Billy Cobham came and did a session for us in Columbus, and I was taken at the time as to what an effective you had your book, but your communication ability was so strong, and that was very impressive to me. And we don't know who we're going to meet and how those relationships are going to continue over the years, but that's it. So the retail business was very interesting to get into, and ironically, around that 1981 was sort of the beginning of Sabian, actually. So.
Well, it is amazing how all this stuff kind of comes into play. But you are this type A personality that is starting to pull from every area. And when you get inspired by something, you just find the energy and you find the time and you make it happen. That's a quality that people have to understand. Not everybody has that, which means that you are driven by deep emotion and passion, that if something really kind of reaches you in the core of who you are, Bob, you just go for it and don't worry about the risk. You'll figure it out as you go along. That's incredible.
Well, yeah. Well, I can tell you that if, sometimes ignorance is very helpful, because had, today in education, we're always saying, well, let's do this. I mean, I even talk about to my own students, let's get this plan together, look at this, look at that. But a lot of things that we do in life are born out of ignorance, not stupidity, but ignorance. Yeah. And so, had Jim and I taken business courses and realized the risks that we were, or maybe even looked at the money that we were investing at the time and put it into zero coupon bonds in 1981 and, or something like that, we would have said, well, that's a stupid thing to do, is to think about opening a drum shop. But we were drummers, man. They still had, you couldn't go in and pick out your own sticks at that time.
Absolutely. And people have to understand it was a different time.
Yeah.
And by having people that, like Phil Zampino was a beautiful guy who had a wonderful Zampino's drum shop on his own. And the fact that he was able to assist you guys to help you out just kind of allowed you to see that we've got help along the way here.
Yeah. And so and we had our original staff at the drum shop were guys that we were hanging out with, and and interestingly, as we went through the 80s, of course, there was a lot of professional work at that time. Yeah. So it was like a barber shop. Guys would just come in and hang out, and literally there would be people would call into the so it's like a musician's hall. Guys would call into the store, say, hey man, I just got a call for a gig Friday night. Who's working? I'm working. Lou, are you working? No, I'm not working. You got it, and that's really the kind of the way it was there. And so it was it's a great time.
It's kind of interesting when you think about just that intensity. So were you being influenced by any music around that time in the formative years? Were there any bands or drummers specifically that were standing out, that were firing you up?
Well, I mean, we all go to the standard players, Buddy and whatnot. But probably in my case, I was probably influenced more by guys like Morello. I think with the Brubeck Quartet. I was very influenced by the Kenton band, particularly John Von Ohlen.
Yeah.
If you're from the Midwest,
yeah.
You really picked up on something from Von Ohlen. There's a funny little way in which I think that a lot of us are influenced or kind of play.
Yeah.
That that is from that. We we kind of notice that when we play with organ players, where the beat is. I could get technical about it, but you remember Von Ohlen.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't remember Von Ohlen. I can remember in '93 when we had the convention, PAS convention in Columbus, we had Von Ohlen come down and play in the lounge. And he had a rattle trap drum set. He was always kind of looked like, a little bit unkempt, as his drum set did. And I can remember some players coming in and some professional players coming in and seeing this old funky looking Gretsch drum set and a cymbal was cut out. Like, whoa, is that? John Von, yeah, I kind of heard that guy. He sat down and played, and it was like silent.
Yeah, I was there. That was incredible.
Silent.
Yeah,
because it was he had an overwhelming sense of swing that I think that was, I mean, you're asking about who was influential. Yeah. Absolutely. I can remember the very first time I saw this guy play with the Stan Kenton Band in Bellefontaine, Ohio in 1970, 71. It was just like something out of out of the heavens. Also, I think that I think things were different in those days, Dom. If somebody played the drums and you got to go see them, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
As the industry changed, I think that that young players became much more locked in or jaded or whatever in terms of what their influential experiences might be. Yeah. My first live experience of seeing somebody was a Rogers Drum Clinic with Roy Burns.
Oh, fantastic!
Right? I mean, you saw him when you were a kid.
Absolutely. Totally.
I mean, if you weren't impressed with that, but by the standards that were imposed 30 or 40 years later, a lot of young people wouldn't go see a Roy Burns because he's a jazz drummer, or he's old, or he doesn't play with so and so.
Right.
Who the heck cares, man? This guy was playing the drums, and I could go see him play the drums. And
that's a great point. And you mentioned the Ludwig symposiums, which Morello played a lot at. Going to hear someone like Morello. What was that like when you went there, and you heard Morello and he's talking? And I mean, that whole experience must have been so inspiring.
It was really unbelievable. I mean, I'm from Marion, Ohio. I drove my little car all the way to Madison, Wisconsin. I actually got to know some individual player. Aldo Mazza and I met at a Ludwig symposium, I think, in '72. Okay, so anyway, just among Houghton was there, I think. But yeah, seeing Frank Arsenault play. Okay.
Old school rudimental player. Yeah.
But Morello, just the way in which he could articulate and then play, was amazing. But some other amazing players too. Andrew Cyril, was, I mean, what an incredible player, made a great impact upon me. Gary Burton, of course, and others. But that was my first experience of just being inundated into this in the manner in which a PAS convention would be today, where you just show up and it surrounds you. And then these were the precursors, if you will, to the PAS convention, all Ludwig artists at the time, but nonetheless, it was the same kind of a concept.
Well, it was amazing when you think about PAS, and as it's coming up again in November, and I want to get down to that. How influential PAS has been, and how many great artists we've heard through the years at PAS. I mean, I remember when all these great drummers would perform there, and it was just, we were walking around like just in awe.
Yeah.
this great talent that was there, but I mean, just to be exposed to it. So talk about the school now at Capitol. You've been there. Well, I had the chance, we did one of our sessions panel there, and I had a chance to be there and visit the school and see your setup, which is the room that you're in right now. And we ended up playing together. We were jamming together, you and I on stage. It was some of the just fantastically fun for us to play together. Talk about the school, about some of the students that you have coming in, and how is it working for you now as far as teaching and the level that of the quality of students that are coming in?
Well, I'll say this. First of all, I have two other great colleagues, Ryan Kilgore and Eric Payton, who help me with everything here. And so Capitol's a school that has it's an all undergraduate school. We've been blessed by having some fantastic support for the percussion area for all these years. I mean, you remember our wing that we have down here, which is dedicated to percussion. And then we have other areas around the school. We have students that are performance and education, of course, jazz studies, but also music technology, music industry. So, and these are all our Bachelor of Music students. So they're studying percussion, they're studying, everything. My philosophy has been in teaching that we have to get your hands together and your motions together and your feet, everything together. So we're working at the beginning on snare drum and keyboard, and I don't mean really super involved keyboard stuff, but you just have to be able to play the instrument, and then we move very quickly on to the other areas. Our four major emphasis areas are snare drum, keyboard, timpani, and drum set. And I find that those four things, and certainly there's world percussion and vibes and other things, but I find that those four primary areas interact with one another very well. And so we have students that'll focus on certain parts of percussion, later on other parts of percussion. And then, of course, we've had some really, as you alluded to, some really fabulous graduates of which I'm very, very proud of. And our studio is, usually in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 majors, and those are all undergrads, and lots of different kinds of ensembles, and lots of different percussion ensembles too. So it's a lot of fun, and it has been a lot of fun, and so that's what's going on.
Well, and it continues. And I had the wonderful pleasure of meeting many of your students and giving a masterclass there when I was there. And I was just so impressed with their attentiveness, the questions they asked, how into it that they were. They really were into it. And whenever I meet a student that comes out of the portals of Bob Breithaupt, whenever I hear anybody that says they've been through the school, I know exactly where their standard of playing is. They're incredible musicians. They're well-rounded. They read well, and they're good people. They understand the qualities of how to work with people in the industry. That really is a testimony to you.
Well, thank you, Dom. I appreciate that. And I tell my students that it's one thing to be a professional musician, but it's another thing to be a music professional. And so that, to me, I think that's very important. And it's funny because I've been teaching long enough now that I have students who have retired themselves or have grandkids or whatever, and that's kind of scary, but that is the way it is, and so many of them have become successful not just as players, but also as administrators or as educators. I mean, you take a guy like Jeff Hartso, was with PAS. He's one of our guys, and I mean, I hesitate to name too many names because I'll forget. But you just interviewed one of my great students, Pete Retzlaff, a couple weeks ago.
Pete, who has just joined us here. Pete is here on listening to us right now. Pete is a great player, man, and you did a great job with him.
Yeah. And but a guy like Pete, you never know what you're going to run into when you start with somebody. And Pete was a really uniquely talented young player. His mom, who just recently passed, unfortunately, allowed him to start playing professionally when he was in high school, allowed him to play in bars, as my parents did, you know. I saw my first bar fights when I was 15, but that's a whole other story. It's true. But Pete was, you know, he was a young, really talented, hotshot kid from right close to here, and he's turned out to be one of the really great educators and players in our business today.
And as Pete says here too, let me see if I can pull him up here. He says, I was fortunate to study with Bob in high school and at Capital U. So you've got some great, you've got this incredible legacy that I think is so fantastic. Thank you, Pete, for joining us here. But it really is an incredible legacy that you have with so many great students that have come along. We've got people here from all around the world. Marina just joined us from Cyprus. Literally all around the world. Andy Zildjian has joined us in. The president of Sabian has come on. He's here.
Hi, Andy.
It's just so great to have this level of people. Claude Hoffman from Belgium. So you got a pretty wide scope here.
Well, that's good. That's good.
What are you doing here, Bob? So now talk about you have done clinics before where you've talked about the history of drumming, where you've kind of dug back into kind of where this all came from. Just talk about that a little bit because it's extremely interesting.
Well, it's kind of interesting. When I was in I'll go back to one of our earlier conversations. I was in school early on as a freshman. I was playing in a jazz band, and there was a tenor player by the name of Candy Johnson who played with some with Ellington, some with Basie, who came and played with our jazz band, and so in my effort to be hip, he asked me to play, just some basic stuff, 4 on the bass drum, 2 and 4, some old school stuff. And of course I thought, and after her first rehearsal, Lou Marini Sr., Blue Lou's dad, pulled me aside and in very colorful language explained to me what I had done wrong, what I needed to do right, and if I expected to be a part of the business and know anything about the music, I needed to listen to the masters. And he was 100% correct. Dressed me down like I had never been dressed down before.
Hard lesson, yeah.
And he was right. That was a turning point for me in that I really got me to start listening closely to the stylistic nature of players. And so fast forward to when I was going to work on my master's thesis, or before that, I just started digging into the history of drumming. It just became part of it, and playing stylistically correct.
Yeah.
I moved to Columbus, and on my first roster, of course I knew this was the case, but William R. Cole was my student. Now, William R. Cole probably doesn't mean much to anybody, but if I said Cozy Cole, that would make some sense. Cozy Cole was a student. He had retired in Columbus. His wife was from here, but he was taking some classes at Capitol. So as a 23-year-old kid who was interested in the history of drumming, I was the teacher of Cozy Cole. And so of course it wasn't really a teacher-student. I mean, it was a mentoring relationship both way. Yeah. But Cozy practiced like crazy. That's a whole other story. But it just sort of, again, heightened the interest to that. So really through working as a master's student, doing clinics and whatnot, I became very, very interested in not just the history, but the application and the importance of playing stylistically correct through not as a museum piece, not being phony, but playing stylistically correct and historically correct.
Well, that's a research that I would love more younger students to really kind of tap into. And that's what you're doing at the school there, which is, This should be a curriculum in every university.
Well, the drum set, Dom, as you know, is I call it a folk instrument in a sense. Now, when we think of folk instruments, we think of rattle trap instruments played by not real musicians or not schooled musicians. But I think it's a folk instrument because it brought together instruments from at least three cultures: Europe, Africa, and Asia, into an instrument that was there to accompany the earliest forms of American jazz, American music, and to support the greatest invention of 20th century music, in my opinion, which was the backbeat. And so we just kind of work from there in terms of how do we add the instruments, how do cymbals come in, the evolution of the hi-hat. I'm going to do a little Sabian Education video coming up on the hi-hat.
Nice.
So anyway, so that's it's just always been a strong interest of mine.
But this is such an important part to understand our contemporary instrument, that this is an American invented instrument, as you said, pulling from all these different cultures. And it's endless on what we can learn about this craft. It really is.
Yeah, it's well, I think it's important for us. It's important for people like yourself or myself or whomever to be articulate about it and to be able to talk about it. I've spent, as many of us have, a lot of time watching Netflix, and I've become interested in some of the music, concerts, and in particular some of the stories about some of the rock bands and heavy metal bands and so forth. That would be a surprise for some of my students, but it's been really interesting to watch how that particular genre has changed and how much appreciation there is, from all players for the history of the instrument.
Boy, it's amazing even to see companies like you had mentioned Sabian, how Sabian in the early 80s, when it first kind of came about, and Bob Zildjian started building this concept of what he wanted to have. And Andy, of course, is now president of the company. Just talk about your relationship with Sabian and just some of the product that you like to have when you're playing.
Well, I've been associated recently with Sabian since about 2006, although I have some instruments from back in the 80s. In fact, when I do the hi-hat thing, I'll probably bring a small cymbal out. It's an HH Sound Control 14-inch cymbal from about 1986. It's my favorite cymbal, actually, which I use for handheld stuff. Traditional jazz kinds of things. But the sound that I have grown into is a hammered sound, or for lack of better terms, an HH sound. I happen to like the hammered cymbals. The cymbals that I have right now that I use most are Artisans and the HH, the new HH sound complex HH complex cymbals, which, by the way, are incredible as drum set cymbals, but equally great as concert cymbals. Suspended cymbals, the hand cymbals are off the chain. They're very, very, very good, and so it's been fun for me to be able to go to the factory a number of times and watch the process, watch Mark and everybody work through these things and do the magic that they do. And I just think it's important for people to understand the level of care and quality that exists in a company like Sabian, because it's there. I mean, I wouldn't have to say it if it wasn't true, and I've seen it, and that's what it is.
you mentioned about people like Mark Reynolds. Talk about Mark Reynolds. Here's a guy that's now with Sabian, who is just again passed through the portals of what you've done. Very intelligent person and articulate what he's doing.
Well, Mark was a private student of mine when he was 15 years old. A real hot shot from Grove City, Ohio. But a really talented young drummer. I remember one time I went over to the high school and helped him out, and so I was playing along there, and one way to cure people of playing too much is take one stick away. Which is what I did, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, a very talented young guy, and has become. He actually worked for us at Columbus Percussion at one point before he went on out to work with other companies. And about 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, I suggested that he might consider taking a look at a position at Sabian. Mark is a very talented guy, great writer. He's the head of the drum line for the Ohio State University Marching Band, which is a very impressive unit. Writes for schools all over the country. Very good drum set player and a very good musician, but has really contributed a tremendous amount over a very difficult time. I mean, Mark took the job at Sabian like a month before, or a week or something before the pandemic, right? and has been able to make a lot happen during that period of time. So I'm very proud of what he's been able to do, and pleased that he's with the company.
Well, this goes back to what we're saying about how you develop these people to be, professionals, musicians and music professionals. I mean, I think that's a very, very important part of the skill that you're passing on to these different people, which is absolutely fantastic. I've got people that are joining us. Sergio Bellotte, who's a phenomenal teacher at Berkeley, has joined us here. Sergio, thank you so much for joining us. And I've got a question I want to bring up here.
Yeah.
From a wonderful young female drummer from Cyprus.
Oh, okay.
Her name is Marina. And her question is, could you please describe one day of a percussion student? What do they do? What do they study? What subjects? How do you take a percussion student and give them this whole picture of all the different percussion instruments? Thank you, Marina.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's a good question, and I'll do my best. But I think that the one thing that's important to talk about is that the percussion students, and this would be the case for almost every institution in the country, they are also going to college. So they are, they're taking a humanities class, they're taking music theory, they're doing this, they're doing that. So being able to manage their time is incredibly important. So if, ideally, if they've got a half hour in the morning that they would otherwise be hanging out and looking at their phone, they're working on they're working on their hands, they're working on scales, they're doing this, preparing themselves for the day. Then they've got ensembles during the day, and then their individual practice. So there's just not much time for things other than what you do as a student. Therefore, the music students, a lot like athletes, their sphere of influence, their core group of people that they hang with are their friends, right? We don't have, percussion students typically are not joining a fraternity or a sorority. That's their fraternity or sorority right there.
Yeah.
And so it is a day that will, comfortably start at 8 o'clock in the morning and extend until 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, and that's why our music school's open until 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's a very demanding schedule, but as I alluded to before, it helps, I think, to establish a sense of time management. For people, and it's fun. Heck, you're playing drums.
Well,
it's got to be fun. You know,
That's the big part of it. The fun factor is that first factor is why we do it and why we're continuing to do it, Bob. We're still doing this and we're still having fun.
Yeah.
You know, Joe Bergamini is as always joined in here, and he made a comment about just welcoming everybody and seeing everybody, and just the fact that he's involved with managing this Sabian Education Network program. It's just so exciting. But Bob, before I leave, I got to ask you one more question in closing. What would you say to this next generation? Here you are, you know, wisdom is an incredible thing that you have, and you've got plenty of wisdom, because wisdom is a combination of knowledge and experience. The knowledge you have and the experience that you have. And that's really kind of where all this wisdom comes in. What would you say to this next generation, young students that come in that have that sparkle in their eyes? They want to continue with the passion and the fun of playing drums. What kind of advice would you deliver to them?
I would say find the things that are about this that are fun to do, that are going to get you up every day. Make sure that when that you're thinking about having a good time and making music when you get up every day. But in addition to that, Dom, I think that looking at the big picture and looking back, look at who were the who was responsible for making things happen. You know, if you got to know about Shelly Mann. I mean, you have to know about Joe Jones. You have to know about if you're a marimba player, you got to know about Musser or Gordon Stout, or you pick it. Vic Firth as a timpanist. If the difference between he and Cloyd Duff, how they played. It's just that, and we don't find out everything by an immediate Google search. You have to dig in a little bit. Yeah,
great advice. You got to kind of go down that rabbit hole of keep going down there and gather that information. So, boy, great advice, Bob. You know, it's so great to have this opportunity to talk to you and be able to have this that we can have to share in the future, both on Facebook and of course on YouTube. That Sabian can share this. It'll go to the Sabian Ed website too. Fantastic, Bob. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your knowledge and the fact that you are sharing all this with everybody.
Well, thank you, Dom. And I have to say thank you to Andy and everybody at Sabian for providing the kind of resources that it takes to keep things going and to keep these kinds of situations alive. It's very important to our students and to the business, to the industry, and thanks very much.
Fantastic. Well, you are one of the leaders in our community, so Sabian is very proud to have you along the way, and it's great, Bob, that I can call you a friend. This is incredible. We go back many, many years, and we're still doing it, Bob. We're still doing it.
Okay, Dom. Get busy, man. Start teaching.
Thank you so much. You're right. Thank you so much, Bob. Stay well.
Okay. Take care.